With this unit, we cross a divide, admittedly an artificial divide created by historians. Most historians date what they call early modern Europe from the Renaissance and modern Europe from the French Revolution, which we'll encounter very soon. But the 17th century, which we've just dashed through, is really a transitional century that laid the groundwork for what we now call the modern world. I'm going to let you guess what I see as the main precursors to modernity, appropriately enough by looking at art. And then we'll kick off our unit with a work that arguably belonged to the last unit, the High Baroque Palace of Versailles. So you've seen this painting by Rubens before, although it wasn't a required work. Do you remember what Rubens' message was? And from that message, what conclusion would you guess many leading philosophers were drawing from the experience of the 1600s? Well, this is a painting about war being stupid and destructive, and of course the great wars of the first half of the 17th century were fought over religion, although the pursuit of political power was often in practice a more important motive. Nevertheless, the bloody wars of religion encouraged many 18th century thinkers, such as Voltaire and Locke, to argue for religious toleration and, especially in Voltaire's case, to criticize the church for promoting conflict and what he saw as superstition. Here's our next art clue, and a question goes with it. What's the big difference in content between Raphael's School of Athens and the painting on the far right, which is entitled The Astronomer? And first, by the way, can you guess who the artist of the second painting is? It's Vermeer. Note the interior scene and the light cast by a window that fails to give a glimpse outside. So the question wasn't entirely fair, because what you can't know from this small image is that our astronomer is reading a book by another Dutch astronomer who wrote in the early 1600s and based his work on then modern astronomers such as Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. This Dutch astronomer also invented astronomical instruments. Here we see a celestial globe. Raphael included plenty of scientists in his school, but they're all from the ancient world. Vermeer's scientist is a modern man. In fact, scholars think the model was his friend von Leeuwenhoek, who invented the superior microscope and more or less founded microbiology. So, what's the word for science and reason that's based on observation of and experiments involving the real world? Well, you may have answered the scientific method, which is really right, but the answer I was looking for is empiricism. So I just gave you the answer to the first question on the next day's homework. So Rachel Reusch's father was an empiricist, and really so was she. So what point am I making with these two slides? The 17th century saw much broader contact between Europe and the rest of the world. The enconchado style of the screen attests to Mexico's contact with Japan via the Philippines, while the Ming jar in the Dutch landscape was a treasured import from China. So growing knowledge of and fascination with the rest of the world is going to become a more central theme. Okay, blast from the recent past is almost over. What important 17th century development might I be getting at here? The 1600s witnessed, as I've mentioned before, the rise of powerful nation-states. These images are the best I could do with our list. Actually, Spanish power was declining in the 1600s. The rise of absolutist monarchies is really best represented by this guy, who didn't show up at all in our last unit, and that's partly because the College Board didn't stick any French Baroque paintings on the list. Not even this one, an old College Board favorite, but also because I decided to kick off this unit with the one French Baroque work on the list, the Palace of Versailles. But first, let's talk about Louis XIV and in general catch up on France. So in France, the religious wars took the form of a civil war between the Catholic and the Calvinist Huguenots, who actually gained control of large chunks of France. Here you see a Protestant painter's depiction of one of the bloodiest episodes from these wars, a massacre in Paris in which about 10,000 Protestants died in a single day. Of course, Protestants killed plenty of Catholics too. It was pretty much equal opportunity, bloodshed, and mayhem during the wars of religion. But the theological and artistic battles that animated Italian, Flemish, Dutch, even Spanish, even Dutch Baroque art largely passed France by. And this may reflect a certain French practicality. So the Protestant Henry IV, you remember him from Marie de Medici, converted to Catholicism rather than fight a bloody battle to capture Catholic Paris. The real ruler of France under his son, Louis XIII, the one who exiled his mom, was a Catholic Cardinal Richelieu who led France into the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side. Basically, Richelieu was more concerned about Habsburg power than about Calvinist or Lutheran doctrines or the approval of his alleged boss, the Pope. Louis XIII's son, Louis XIV, ruled France for 72 years. He came to the throne when he was only 7 years old, so he reigned for most of our Baroque century. Civil war broke out again when Louis XIV was a young boy, this time because the French nobility was revolting against French royal power, and young Louis was forced to flee for his life. Louis XIV learned some important lessons from his turbulent youth, and when he came of age, he set about establishing strong centralized rule that revolved around Louis XIV, the Sun King, the way the planets revolved around the sun, and yes, Copernicus had triumphed. This work no longer shows up on the list, and it was described well in your reading, but note that this painting is all about Louis's power and authority. So what makes this a quintessentially Baroque work? It's highly staged. This is Louis XIV starring in the role as king, spotlit and carefully positioned on center stage. Notice he's elevated and has high heels. The fellow was only 5'4". And that's another element of another French Baroque element. Royal power is all about size and imposing grandeur. So here's a little comparative exercise. In 1665, the Sun King summoned the famous Roman architect Bernini to France to design a new east facade for his palace, the Louvre. So here are some of Bernini's sketches. Note the curves, the alternating convex and concave facade. Bernini may not have liked Borromini, but he was willing to steal his ideas. But it all seemed so Italian. And here's the design that won out in the end. You may notice that the same architects designed Versailles. So what did the king reject, and what did he want in the end? He rejected curves and high drama, and instead he went for classical, imposing, and horizontal. This is a building that exudes power. But Louis XIV still had a power problem. French nobles continued to chafe under re-established central royal power. Louis needed to keep his nobles under control, and he needed to keep them entertained so they wouldn't have the time or resources to foment rebellion. This was his solution, a palace complex 11 miles from the hotbed of noble power, Paris. Remember, this is 11 miles before the automobile made that a meaningless distance. And here we see the gardens. For some reason, the landscape designer doesn't appear on the College Board identifiers, but I'm sticking him in. So what do you notice about the design of these gardens, especially as you move from the formal gardens surrounding the palace back into the grounds? Well, nature near the palace is fully disciplined by royal power. As the gardens recede, they become more natural, less tame. But understand, nature was not allowed all that much rain at Versailles. Laying out the gardens required enormous work. Vast amounts of earth were shifted to lay out the flower beds, the orangerie, the fountains, and the canal. Note the prominence of water. The earth was transported in wheelbarrows. The trees were conveyed by cart from all the provinces of France. Sometimes entire regiments were involved. To get to Versailles, one entered through 3 roads that converged at the chateau, with the axes finally joining, not accidentally, in Louis's bedroom. I'm going to let Ms. Jacobs describe the ritual of the bedroom, and no, this won't be R-rated. Here are 2 more views of the imposing entrance. We see a few more Baroque touches in the gilding and the decoration surrounding the clocks, but generally the impression is classical, stately, and horizontally massive. Again, this is all about the weight and might of royal power. Here's Versailles' most famous room, the Hall of Mirrors. Again, it was designed to dazzle in every sense of the word. And of course, the mirrors just magnified the size of the room and the brilliance of the candlelit gold. The mirrors were also designed to reflect the magnificent gardens outside the windows, which were in turn reflected by the water. Remember that mirrors and reflection is very central to Baroque art. So this room looks a little more Baroque with its curved ceiling and its over-the-top decoration. Here's the Royal Chapel, which isn't one of our required images, but note that it combines Baroque decorative opulence with a more classic and geometric design. The elaborately gilded altar in the apse is sending the usual Counter-Reformation message about the centrality of the Eucharist. Louis XIV was willing to ally with Protestants in his foreign wars if that was convenient for the French state, but at home he ruthlessly suppressed Protestantism and imposed Catholicism as the French state religion. At the same time, he was quite unwilling to take orders from popes and insisted on considerable state control of the French church, including the appointments of bishops and priests. I'm going to pause now, and in my next lecture, we'll see how it all fell apart.